Alright guys, welcome back to the first episode of Resurrect, where we get started on our first rebuild project for the show. And the first car we're going to do is one of my favorites. It's one that I've done in the past and I really enjoy this car a lot. But this one is a 2011 BMW E92 M3. Great car. These cars are absolutely fun to drive, and I think for the money, bar none, there's not a car that handles better than this car. So we're going to do this as our first project. I'm going to take you around the car and show you a few things that are wrong with it. There's some serious things that are wrong with this car, but it's something that we're going to take care of, and we're going to take care of this in a regular garage. So let me take you around the car and show you what's wrong. So for some reason you're absolutely blind and you could not see what was behind me. This car has been wrecked and it looks pretty bad. You know, we've got some parts missing here. Now, I actually did rip some parts off already. Some of the parts were crushed in such a way that was preventing me from seeing all the damage, as well as seeing the front of the engine. So I actually pulled these parts out with the tow cable on my winch on my trailer, just gently, just to get enough space to work and see what's going on. And a lot of times when you have accident damage, you just kind of need to move things out of the way. So sometimes when you try to unbolt stuff, it's not accessible, so you really do got to just pull stuff out of the way. So we've done that already. Let me take you around the positive parts of the car, because that's pretty nasty damage right there. But you know, obviously the side, the rear, those parts of the car, those are all look good. Those are all in good condition. The fenders are actually probably usable. I have to determine later on if I'm going to use them. But here's the really nasty stuff, guys. If you take a minute to look in here, you'll see the frame rail right there, right here. There is a bend. Now, it's not a terrible bend, but it's bad enough that we're probably going to have to section this out and make that look better, fix that right. And the other side as well, kind of very difficult to see. And unfortunately, when you buy a car like this, a wrecked car, even if you go down to the auction to inspect it, when it's wrecked like this, sometimes you just cannot see what's going on, and that was the case with this car. I bought this sight unseen, but even if I had gone to see it, the way all the covers were installed on the car, the way the accident was, where all this was pushed up against the engine, it was really impossible to see this damage. So there is always going to be surprises at the salvage auction. It's just important that you are prepared for that and you're able to deal with any situation that may come your way. But the positive thing on this car, one of the reasons why I bid on it, is because we had actually no airbags go off in the car, which I thought was unusual for such a hard hit. However, it's not the first time I've seen something like this. For whatever reason, the airbags might not go off in an accident that you think they would go off in. So the car is inside is in pretty good condition. I've already stripped down some areas. I had to get the car into neutral, and on this double clutch transmission, you've got to pull this cover off, and then right here there's a little lever. You just put a screwdriver in there, and then now you can get the car into neutral. So that's what was done here. But overall, the car's in really good shape. 2011, 50,000 miles. A lot of times on these type of cars, when I do a rebuild on a M3 or any type of specialty car, the parts on it are going to be horrendous. So in order to make this cost effective, I purchased this. This is my donor car. This was a flood car that I picked up for a very cheap price, which I'll tell you later. I picked it up for basically what it would cost to buy an engine alone, and thankfully this engine is good. It is a flood car, so I'm going to show you a little bit on how to deal with flood cars. Now, you're probably thinking, why don't I just rebuild this car? It's in great shape. I mean, it's in okay shape, but it has a certificate of destruction, which means it has a title that I cannot do anything with. Other than a parts car or export, this car is pretty much done in this country. So I will be pulling all of my replacement parts off of this car, transferring them to this car, and I'll take you through the entire process. But the first step is we're going to harvest this car for all the usable parts, all the sellable parts. We're just going to strip this thing down to a unibody, and we're going to do that fairly quickly. and we're gonna take everything we need and we're gonna sell the rest, scrap the unibody, and we're good to go. Okay, so here we have it. The donor car is in the garage right now, and I want to strip all the parts that I need off of this car to transpose onto the wrecked salvage car. But the first thing I want to do is I want to identify whether or not this engine runs, and I want to see how well it runs. So I've already removed all the engine oil. As soon as I received the car, there was about a couple quarts of water in the crankcase, and there was a little bit of water on top of a couple of the cylinders. So I pulled out all the spark plugs, cranked the engine over, let all that water come out, added a little bit of oil to each cylinder, put the spark plugs and coils back in, and then filled the engine with fresh oil. Then I let that engine idle for about 10 minutes or so. So now I have it here, and I'm gonna drain the engine oil for the second time, because what I wanna do is make sure that I've removed all traces of water from the engine, or as much as I possibly can. So I'm gonna do that now, and we're gonna see what that looks like. Okay, so here we are underneath the car, and I've already drained the oil once. I did pull out maybe about 2 or 3 quarts of water the first time. Immediately when I got this car, I removed all the oil from the car, and there was quite a bit of water. But now I've had the engine running for a little bit with fresh oil in it, so we're going to do this again. It's very important to do this again, because you'll never get all the water out from the initial oil drain. So we're going to remove this oil from the M3 engine. On these engines, there's 2 drain plugs, so we cannot forget to do both. Otherwise, we'll have a substantial amount of water and dirty oil still in the engine. Take this first drain plug out. There we go. That's some watery looking oil right there. And that was nothing. I thought that was something solid, but no, it's just a splash. But yeah, on these engines, or on these flooded engines, what you want to do is definitely let that run, not at a high RPM, just a low RPM at idle for a few minutes. Let the engine get to temperature, and then drain the oil. And then we're going to put in some fresh oil and see how that goes. It looks like coffee. That's what it looks like. It looks like coffee coming straight out of this engine. Screen filter, just to see what kind of debris might have been in there, if there's any, and will get us a good idea of the inside of this engine and what it looks like. We'll pull the filter, and we'll put some fresh oil in it, and then we'll try this again and fire it up. So we've removed all of the oil from the engine now, and we have fresh oil in it. And I went to start it up, and I'm having some issues. So I'd like to go through all the things that I've had to do to really get this engine going. In a flood car, a lot of the electronics will be toast. So the car wouldn't start in the beginning because I had a lack of fuel pressure. So I was able to figure out which modules worked and which didn't by a handy dandy little tool that I got here. This is an iCarsoft scanner that I got on eBay. These cost about between $100 and $150, and this one works specifically with BMW. And the reason why it's good to have something like this is because a device like that can communicate with every single module. So it'll tell you, it'll do kind of like a roll call, and it'll see what's there and what's not. And so when I use that device, I could see the ECU was not communicating. So I went ahead and took the ECU off my other car, my wrecked car, and transposed it into this car. And when you do something like that, there's another module that you'll have to swap out, the CAS module, as well as the key. And with those 3 devices, you can actually use them together to start a car where the ECU is dead. So I was able to start the car up with that, and then when I did that, I started to get fuel pressure. Then I still had some issues. The engine really wasn't running very well. So a lot of times in a flood car, the fuel tank, sometimes it'll get water into the fuel tank, sometimes water will get in there, and sometimes it won't. This car was missing the fuel cap, so I think obviously water got high enough and it got into the fuel system. So I opened up the fuel tank. I completely drained it by just pulling the fuel line here at the engine, and then I kept starting it until all the gas came out. Then I opened up the fuel tank, got a towel, just wiped everything down, got all the mud and gunk and whatever was in there, and I filled it with fresh gas, and then it did run slightly better. However, it still was not running well. And the last problem that we had here, it was we had a wiring problem, and I'm not sure if this happened where the car came from or it happened here, but some type of rodent got into the engine area and chewed up some of the wires. So that was pretty difficult to find, but once I started going through the wires, I could see that the wires were chewed up in several places. This is actually the wiring harness that was damaged, and I don't know, there's probably about 4 or 5 different areas where it was chewed up, but the wires have been completely severed in a few spots. And thankfully I have another one of these from a previous build, and I put that in the car, and the engine does run a lot better. It doesn't run perfect, but it runs better, and it runs well enough for me to know that the mechanicals of the engine are okay. So we're gonna test fire this thing, fire it up, let it run, see how it runs, and hopefully everything is good, and we can get this engine out and sold. So let's fire this thing up and see what happens. All right, so there you have it. We do have a running engine. Now, it doesn't run amazing. We have a little bit of issues revving the engine up, but I think most of that is electrical issues. I do have some codes on my computer for the throttle body actuators. Those are probably toast, as well as many of the electrical sensors. So those will have to be replaced, but mechanically, the engine's okay. There's no knocking sounds, there's no type of metal hitting metal, and that's a great sign. So this is a completely usable engine. Now, an engine like this with this kind of miles, they typically sell used between $5,000 and $7,000. I probably won't be able to get that much money for this because I'd like to sell it quickly, and it does have kind of a dubious history here. So we're gonna try to get this thing sold for close to that, as close as possible. But I will be able to recoup a majority of the money I paid for this car on that engine, and then once the transmission and differential are sold, then I will be able to recoup 100% or more of what I paid for this car. So there's a lot of great parts, a lot of sellable parts on this car that we'll strip off. The rest of it we're going to scrap, maybe just get a few $100 for it, but just get it out of here. And we're going to have all of our donor parts for free for our rebuild project. So thanks again for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy these videos, and on the next video we'll be stripping this thing down. We're going to be doing that as quickly as possible, and I'll show you how it's done. See you next time.